The Galactic Council chambers had never been this quiet. Admiral Vexahai of the Zephyrian Empire stared at the holographic display showing the latest casualty reports, her 4 eyes blinking in sequence as she processed the impossible numbers. 300 years of continuous warfare, and they were losing ground faster than ever. Another 12 systems fell last week, announced Counselor Morden, his crystalline form shifting colors to reflect his emotional state, currently a deep crimson of despair. The Devourers have adapted to every strategy we've deployed. Our most advanced tactical algorithms are worthless against them. The Devourers. Even the name sent ripples of fear through the assembled representatives of 47 different species. They had emerged from the galactic rim 3 centuries ago like a plague of living metal and hunger. No one knew where they came from or what they truly wanted, only that they consumed everything in their path. Planets, stars, entire civilizations, leaving behind nothing but empty space and scattered debris. The Theknari battle fleet was completely destroyed at Proxima Centauri, continued Mordoon. 15,000 ships gone in 4 hours. The Devourers didn't even slow down. Admiral Vexay's tail twitched with frustration. The Theknari were master strategists, their battle computers capable of calculating millions of combat scenarios per second. If they couldn't find a way to win, what hope did anyone else have? What about the Nexus Coalition's new quantum weaponry? Asked Ambassador Zilka, her tentacles writhing nervously. Surely their reality warping capabilities failed spectacularly, interrupted Vexai. The Devourers somehow absorbed the quantum fluctuations and used them to power their own systems. They're not just adapting to our technology. They're stealing it, improving it, and turning it against us. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft humming of the chamber's life support systems. Every species represented here had contributed their greatest weapons, their most brilliant minds, their most advanced technologies to this war. The result was always the same. Temporary victories followed by devastating defeats as the Devourers learned, adapted, and overcome. Perhaps, said Counselor Thanios, his voice barely above a whisper, it's time to consider evacuation protocols. We could retreat to the Outer Rim, establish new colonies beyond their reach, and abandon how many billion souls? Vex's voice cut through the chamber like a plasma blade. No, there has to be another way. That's when the chamber's communication system crackled to life. Galactic Council, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Diplomatic Corps. We're requesting immediate audience. Every head, tentacle, and optical sensor turned toward the communication array. The humans? What could they possibly want? Earth was barely a footnote in galactic affairs, a primitive world that had only achieved faster than light travel 50 years ago. Their technology was laughably basic. Their military consisted of chemical-powered projectile weapons and nuclear fission reactors. They were so far behind the galactic standard that most species considered them a curiosity at best. Patch them through, Vexahay ordered, more out of curiosity than hope. The holographic projector shimmered to life, revealing a human female in a simple blue uniform. She appeared to be middle-aged by human standards, with graying hair and eyes that seemed older than her face. Behind her, Vexai could see what appeared to be the bridge of a human spacecraft. Primitive displays, manual controls, and crew members who looked barely out of adolescence. Admiral Vexai, members of the Council, Captain Chen began, her voice steady despite the obvious technological gap between her ship and the Council chambers. We've been monitoring the war reports. We'd like to help. A sound that might have been laughter rippled through the chamber, though it came out as various clicks, whistles, and harmonic tones from the different species present. Captain Chen, Vex's High said, trying to keep the condescension out of her voice, we appreciate Earth's concern, but this conflict is beyond anything your species has encountered. The Devourers have defeated civilizations that were building star-spanning empires when your people were still discovering fire. With respect, Admiral, Chen replied, and Vexhai was surprised by the human's tone, not defensive or insulted, but something else, determined. Every species that's fought the Devourers has approached this as a technological problem. You've tried to outgun them, outthink them, outmaneuver them using the same basic principles of warfare that got you this far. But what if the problem isn't technological? Counselor Mordoon's crystalline form shifted to a skeptical orange. Then what kind of problem is it? A human one. The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't the defeated quiet of despair, but the uncertain stillness of a room full of brilliant minds trying to process something that didn't fit their understanding of reality. Explain, Vexkai ordered. Chen leaned forward slightly, and for the first time, Vexkai noticed something in the human's eyes that she hadn't seen in any council member's face for decades. Hope. You've all been fighting this war the way your species naturally fight, with superior technology, careful planning, overwhelming force applied strategically. But humans, we're different. We've never been the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced. What we are is stubborn. We specialize in impossible situations. Captain, Ambassador Zilka interjected, the Devourers have consumed 17% of the galaxy. This isn't a matter of determination. Every human conflict in our history has been won by someone who was supposed to lose, Chen continued as if she hadn't been interrupted. We have entire military doctrines based on asymmetric warfare, guerrilla tactics, and making the impossible possible through sheer bloody-minded refusal to give up. You want to know why 47 advanced civilizations can't beat the Devourers? Because you're trying to fight them fairly. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of sounds, outraged chittering, harmonic protests, and electromagnetic field fluctuations that served as communication for the energy-based species. Fairly? Vexay's voice rose above the din. We're fighting for the survival of galactic civilization. Exactly, Chen replied, her smile visible even through the holographic interference. So why are you still following rules? It took several minutes for the chamber to quiet down. When it did, Chen was still there, still smiling, still radiating that impossible confidence. You're proposing what exactly? Vexay asked finally. Give us the coordinates of the Devourer's next target.
Let's handle it.
Your entire space navy couldn't challenge a single Zephyrian patrol craft. Admiral, you're still thinking conventionally. We don't need to match their firepower. We just need to make them stop adapting long enough for you to hit them where it counts. Vexay studied the human captain's face through the hologram. In all her years of military service, she had learned to read determination in dozens of different species. This human had something she hadn't seen before, not just determination, but a kind of reckless certainty that bordered on insanity. The next target is the Belarius system, she said slowly. 12 inhabited worlds, combined population of 43 billion. The Theknari fleet will make their stand there in 6 days. They're expecting to delay the Devourers for perhaps 8 hours before... Perfect, Chen interrupted. We'll be there in 5 days. We'll need you to do exactly what you've been doing. Follow standard tactics, deploy your fleets conventionally, make it look like business as usual. And what will you be doing? Chen's smile widened. Something the Devourers have never seen before. Something none of you have ever seen before. Which is humans being human. The connection terminated, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Finally, Ambassador Zilka voiced what everyone was thinking. Are we actually going to let them try? Vexay stared at the empty space where Chen's hologram had been. In 300 years of warfare, every strategy had been attempted, every advanced technique deployed, every technological advantage exploited. They had tried everything their civilizations could conceive of. Everything except trusting the galaxy's most primitive species to save them all. Yes, she said quietly. 'Cause we're running out of alternatives, and sometimes... She paused, remembering the look in the human's eyes. Sometimes the most logical thing to do is something completely illogical. The humans have exactly one small fleet, Councillor Thanios protested. 47 ships with primitive weapons and outdated shields. What could they possibly accomplish that our greatest fleets couldn't? Vexay was already issuing orders to her communications officer, sending encrypted messages to Theknari fleet commanders, preparing for what might be the most important battle in galactic history. I don't know, she admitted, but Captain Chen was right about one thing. Every approach we've tried has been based on our understanding of warfare, our concept of what's possible. Maybe it's time to see what happens when someone who doesn't understand the rules decides to play the game. As the council session ended and representatives began filing out to prepare their own fleets for what many assumed would be another devastating defeat, Vexhai remained in her seat, staring at the tactical displays showing Devourer movements toward the Belarius system. For the first time in decades, she found herself wondering if the impossible might actually be possible after all, and if it was, it would be because a species that barely qualified as spacefaring had looked at the galaxy's greatest threat and said the 4 words that would echo through history. We've got this. The next 5 days would determine whether humanity was about to save the galaxy or simply add their name to the list of extinct species that had underestimated the Devourer's adaptive capabilities. Either way, Bexhai realized as she watched the human fleet's primitive signatures appear on long-range sensors heading directly towards certain destruction with all the confidence of a species too young to know better, the galaxy was about to witness something unprecedented. Whether that something would be salvation or catastrophe remained to be seen. The UES Defiance hung in space like a metal tumor against the starfield, its hull scarred by hasty modifications and covered in equipment that violated every known principle of efficient spacecraft design. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge, watching the Belarius system grow larger on the view screen, and tried not to think about how many regulations they were about to break. "Admiral?" called Lieutenant Rodriguez from the communication station. "We're receiving hails from the Theknari flagship. They want to know our battle plan." Chen almost smiled. Battle plan, if only it were that simple. "Tell them we're implementing Strategy 7, she replied. Rodriguez paused, his hands hovering over the controls. "Ma'am, we don't have a Strategy 7. "I know. That's the point." Behind her, Dr. Elizabeth Parker looked up from her tablet, her scientist mind still struggling with what they were about to attempt. "Sarah, I need to stress again that this is completely theoretical. We've never tested these modifications under combat conditions. We've never tested them under any conditions," added Commander James Wright, the ship's chief engineer. "Half this equipment was built in the last 72 hours using parts we borrowed from mining operations." Chen turned to face her senior staff. They were all here, the 47 best and brightest that humanity could spare for what everyone back on Earth was calling either humanity's greatest triumph or most spectacular suicide. Looking at their faces, she saw the same expression she'd carried since accepting this mission, the peculiar mixture of terror and excitement that came from doing something that every logical analysis said was impossible. "Remind me again why we thought this would work?" asked Commander Lisa Zhang, the tactical officer whose job it was to coordinate their unconventional weapon systems. "Because," Chen replied, settling into her command chair, "the Devourers have spent 300 years learning to counter every logical response. They've adapted to energy weapons, projectile weapons, quantum manipulation, reality warping, and temporal distortion. They've learned to predict every known tactical doctrine and counter every recognized strategy. So we're betting our lives on them not knowing how to counter something that doesn't make sense?" "No," Chen corrected. "We're betting our lives on them not being able to adapt fast enough to counter 47 different things that don't make sense, all happening at the same time." Through the view screen, they could see the Theknari battle line forming. 200 massive warships arranged in perfect geometric patterns, their weapons charging, their shields synchronizing in preparation for the coordinated assault they'd practiced thousands of times. It was beautiful, efficient, and exactly what the Devourers expected. "Incoming transmission from Admiral Kethvar," Rodriguez reported. The main screen shifted to show the Theknari commander, a tall, insectoid being whose compound eyes reflected the bridge lights like tiny stars. When he spoke, his voice carried the harmonic undertones that indicated deep skepticism. "Admiral Chen, my fleet is prepared to begin the assault. I trust your people understand the magnitude of what we're attempting." "We understand that standard tactics haven't worked for 300 years, Chen replied. "We also understand that sometimes the best way to solve an impossible problem is to change the rules." "They adapt. Admiral Kethvar, with respect, every species that's fought them has tried to beat them by becoming better at what the Devourers already understand. We're going to try something they've never encountered before." "And what is that?" Chen's smile was visible even through the subspace interference. "Pure, undiluted human chaos." Before the Theknari commander could respond, proximity alarms began blaring throughout both fleets. On the edge of the system, space itself seemed to writhe and tear as the Devourer fleet emerged from whatever impossible dimension they used from faster-than-light travel. They came like a plague of living metal, ships that defied every known principle of engineering, their hulls flowing and reshaping themselves even as they moved. Some were the size of cities, bristling with weapons that had been stolen and improved from defeated civilizations. Others were small and fast, darting between their larger companions like metallic insects. All of them shared the same fundamental wrongness that made every organic being's instincts scream in horror. "Target count is still climbing," Zhang reported, her voice tight with controlled fear. "Current estimate is 37,000 individual units, but they keep subdividing and merging. Mass readings are off the charts. They're already adapting to our sensor profiles," added Parker, monitoring the science station. "Whatever scanning methods we're using, they're developing countermeasures in real time." Chen nodded. This was exactly what every previous battle had shown. The Devourers could counter any known technology almost as soon as they encountered it. But humanity had learned something in their brief history of space exploration that the more advanced species had forgotten. Sometimes being primitive was an advantage. "All ships execute Chaos Protocol Alpha," Chen ordered. "Remember, if it makes sense, don't do it. If it seems logical, do the opposite. If it follows any known tactical doctrine, abort and try something else." Throughout the human fleet, 47 captains acknowledged the order and began implementing strategies that would have gotten them court-martialed in any sane military organization. Captain Torres of the UES Stubborn opened fire with his main guns, not at the approaching Devourer fleet, but at empty space 3 light minutes away from any enemy contact. His weapons weren't even energy beams or projectiles, but modified mining lasers that had been recalibrated to output random frequencies that changed every one. 3 seconds. Captain Okafor of the UES Persistence began launching what appeared to be supply containers directly into the path of the advancing enemy fleet. Each container was filled with a different substance. Some held industrial waste, others contained musical recordings from human history, and one was packed entirely with recipes for Earth pizza. Captain Singh of the UES Contrary fired her engines at maximum thrust, not toward the enemy or away from them, but perpendicular to the battle plane, accelerating toward the system's star while broadcasting what appeared to be a documentary about penguin mating rituals. "Admiral," Rodriguez reported, his voice cracking with barely suppressed hysteria, "I'm getting requests from 17 different ship captains asking for permission to try things that violate the laws of physics." "Granted," Chen replied without hesitation. "Except for Captain Martinez. Tell him that trying to rams a Devourer ship with a vessel full of Earth's most annoying pop songs is too logical. He needs to think more chaotically." On the view screen, the Devourer fleet was beginning to react to the human presence. Ships that had been advancing in perfect formation began to slow, their hulls rippling as they tried to analyze the completely nonsensical patterns of behavior they were encountering. "They're confused," Parker reported, wonder creeping into her voice. "Look at these readings. Their adaptation processes are cycling through different configurations, but they can't find a pattern to counter because there isn't one." The Theknari fleet chose that moment to begin their assault, launching coordinated volleys of plasma fire and quantum torpedoes in perfect geometric patterns. It was a textbook attack executed flawlessly by the galaxy's premier military force. Devourers countered it effortlessly, their ships' hulls shifting to absorb the energy weapons and their own guns returning fire with devastating accuracy. Within minutes, 12 Theknari vessels were destroyed and the rest were falling back in good order just as every previous engagement had shown they would. But something was different this time. As the Devourers pursued their logical enemy, they kept glancing toward the human fleet with what could only be described as digital confusion. Ships would start to adapt to counter the mining lasers, then detect the supply containers and reconfigure to deal with potential projectile weapons, then notice the Penguin documentary and attempt to decode it for tactical intelligence. "They're trying to adapt to everything at once," Zhang reported, barely able to keep the excitement out of her voice. "But every time they start to counter one of our ships, another captain does something completely different." Captain Reyes of the UES Unpredictable had begun firing her weapons in rhythm with classical Earth music while rotating her ship in patterns that corresponded to mathematical sequences that had been proven to be meaningless. The Devourers assigned 3 ships to analyze her behavior, their processing power devoted to finding the tactical significance in Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Captain Johnson of the UES Paradox was flying in formation with a Devourer vessel, matching its speed and course exactly while broadcasting continuous apologies for the inconvenience and asking if the enemy crew needed directions to the nearest gas station. "This is insane, Doctor," Parker breathed, watching the tactical display. "It's actually working. They can't adapt because there's nothing to adapt to." "No," Chen corrected, standing up from her command chair. "They can't adapt because they're trying to adapt to everything. We're not fighting them with superior technology. We're fighting them with superior confusion." The moment of truth came when the Devourers decided to focus their entire fleet on the human ships. 37,000 vessels turned their attention away from the Theknari and accelerated toward the tiny human fleet, their weapons charging and their hulls reconfiguring for what should have been a massacre. "All ships," Chen ordered, her voice carrying across the comm channels to 46 other captains who were about to prove that humans were either the galaxy's salvation or its greatest cosmic joke. Phase 2. "Remember, if it worked in Phase 1, don't do it again. If it made the enemy confused, find a way to make them more confused. If any of your actions start to make sense, you're doing it wrong." The response was immediate and glorious. Captain Torres stopped shooting at empty space and began shooting at his own supply containers, but only the ones that contained musical recordings, not the ones with industrial waste. Captain Okafor started launching herself toward individual devourer ships while broadcasting technical manuals for Earth toasters. Captain Singh aimed her ship toward the star but then fired all weapons backward while playing recordings of human laughter at maximum volume. The effect on the devourer fleet was immediate and unprecedented. Ships began colliding with each other as their adaptive algorithms crashed trying to process the contradictory data. Vessels that had been reconfiguring to counter mining lasers suddenly encountered toaster manuals and had to restart their analysis processes. Others tried to adapt to the laughter, treating it as some kind of sonic weapon, only to discover that their countermeasures made them vulnerable to the penguin documentaries they'd dismissed earlier. "Admiral," Lieutenant Rodriguez called out, his voice filled with disbelief, "we're getting reports from across the Devourer fleet. They're actually retreating." Chen stared at the view screen as the most feared force in galactic history, the unstoppable plague that had consumed 17% of known space, began to pull back from a confrontation with 47 ships that collectively had less firepower than a single Theknari frigate. "No," she said quietly, "they're not retreating. Look at their formation." Parker checked her instruments and gasped. "They're regrouping. All ships are linking their processing power, combining their adaptive capabilities. They're going to try to analyze everything we've done and come up with a master counter-strategy." "How long?" Chen asked. "Maybe 20 minutes. Chen nodded and opened a channel to the Theknari flagship. "Admiral Kethvar, this is your chance. We've disrupted their adaptation cycle, but it won't last long. Hit them now with everything you've got." "But they'll adapt. Not if we keep them busy. All human vessels prepare for Phase 3. It's time to show them what real chaos looks like." As the Theknari fleet powered up their weapons for a second assault, and the human captains prepared to implement strategies that would make Phase 2 look rational by comparison, Chen allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. They were still outnumbered 30,000 to 1. They were still outgunned by a factor that required scientific notation to express. The Devourers were still the most adaptive force the galaxy had ever seen, but for the first time in 300 years, they were acting defensively instead of aggressively. They were confused instead of confident. They were trying to understand instead of simply consuming. And that, Chen realized as she prepared to order her fleet into the most chaotic, illogical, and beautifully human assault in military history, was exactly where humanity wanted them. Captain Maria Santos had been in command of the UES Impossible for exactly 6 hours, and she was already convinced that this was either the most brilliant or most insane military operation in human history, possibly both. "Captain," called Ensign Park from the navigation station, "we're receiving Admiral Chen's Phase 3 orders. I'm not sure these are actually orders, ma'am." Santos looked at the text scrolling across her command screen and had to read it twice to make sure she wasn't hallucinating. "Implement the toddler protocol, begin Operation Spaghetti Junction, and if anyone asks what we're doing, tell them we're hunting space whales." "Yes, ma'am. Also, we're supposed to ignore all previous tactical protocols and instead base our maneuvers on..." Park paused, checking his screen again. "On the mating dance of the Australian bowerbird. She'd commanded vessels through asteroid fields, participated in first contact protocols, and once successfully navigated a ship through a solar flare using nothing but manual controls and prayers. None of that had prepared her for this moment." "Acknowledged," she said. Because what else could she say? Helm, plot a course based on bowerbird mating behavior. Weapons, prepare the spaghetti launchers. "The what now?" asked Lieutenant Chen at the weapons station. "The modified food dispensers we jury-rigged with industrial printers. They're loaded with, well, actual spaghetti. About 14 tons of it." Across the human fleet, similar conversations were taking place as 47 captains tried to implement orders that would have been rejected by any sane military computer as obvious malfunctions. The beauty of the human approach was that they weren't relying on computers. They were relying on the uniquely human ability to embrace chaos and still somehow function. The Devourer fleet, meanwhile, was attempting to do exactly the opposite. 37,000 ships had formed a perfect sphere in space, their hulls connected by energy conduits that allowed them to share processing power and sensory data. They were approaching the problem of human behavior like any other tactical challenge. Gather data, analyze patterns, develop countermeasures. What they were discovering was that human behavior didn't have patterns. At least, not patterns that made any kind of tactical sense. "Admiral," reported Commander Jiang from the flagship Defiance, "we're getting some interesting readings from the Devourer formation. It looks like they're devoting approximately 40% of their collective processing power to trying to understand Captain Johnson's ship movements. Admiral Chen checked the tactical display and saw the UES Paradox flying in what appeared to be a figure-8 pattern while firing its main guns at 30-second intervals. It looked completely random until she realized that Johnson was recreating the flight path of a drunken bee he'd apparently once watched in his grandmother's garden. What about the other 60% of their processing power? Split between trying to decode the toaster manuals, analyzing the Penguin documentaries for hidden military intelligence, and attempting to calculate the tactical significance of, Zhang paused, double-checking her readings, of human laughter? Shen nodded approvingly. This is exactly what they'd hoped for. The Devourers were so accustomed to facing logical opponents that they couldn't comprehend the possibility that there might not be any underlying strategy to analyze. Phase 3 is now active, she announced to the fleet. Remember, people, if it made sense in Phase 2, don't do it in Phase 3. If it was chaotic before, make it more chaotic. If anyone, including yourselves, can understand what you're doing, you're not being human enough. The response was immediate and glorious. Captain Torres of the UES Stubborn began firing his mining lasers at the Devourer fleet, but only at ships whose whole configurations reminded him of kitchen appliances. His targeting computer had been reprogrammed to prioritize enemies based on how much they looked like the toaster that had burned his breakfast 6 months ago. Captain Okafor was now launching her supply containers in patterns that corresponded to the positions of stars and constellations that didn't actually exist, while broadcasting her personal collection of Earth game shows at frequencies that made no mathematical sense. Captain Singh had given up shooting at the star and was instead trying to use her ship's gravitational wake to compose a space-based version of her daughter's favorite nursery rhyme. But it was Captain Santos who achieved what military historians would later call the most beautifully illogical tactical maneuver in recorded history. All right, people, she announced to her crew, we're going to show these adaptive machines what real chaos looks like. Helm, begin the bowerbird dance, but modify it based on how I think my cat would react to discovering a cucumber in its food bowl. Weapons. Prepare to launch our entire spaghetti payload, but I want each strand fired individually with exactly 2.73 seconds between launches. Communications. Broadcast our ship's maintenance manual, but read it backwards while humming the theme song from a children's television show. Ma'am, asked Ensign Park hesitantly, which children's television show? The most annoying one you can remember? The UES Impossible began its approach toward the Devourer fleet like a cosmic interpretation of modern dance performed by someone who had never heard of modern dance and was operating under the assumption that gravity was merely a suggestion. The ship corkscrewed through space in patterns that violated 3 laws of physics and several principles of good taste, leaving behind a trail of individually launched spaghetti strands that created the galaxy's first and only edible space minefield. The effect on the Devourer fleet was immediate and catastrophic. Ships that had been preparing to counter the spaghetti as some form of projectile weapon were forced to reassess when they detected that each strand was being launched with mathematical precision that suggested a tactical purpose they couldn't identify. The backwards maintenance manual triggered responses in 17 different algorithmic systems, each trying to decode the hidden intelligence data they assumed was embedded in instructions for changing air filters. But it was the children's television theme song that broke their collective artificial intelligence. The Devourers had encountered every form of communication in the galaxy. Mathematical codes, harmonic languages, electromagnetic pulses that carried information, even temporal distortions that transmitted data backwards through time. They had never encountered something that was deliberately annoying for no apparent reason. Admiral, Commander Zhang reported from the Defiance, her voice filled with wonder, the Devourer fleet is, stuttering. Their formation is breaking up as individual ships try to process the theme song. Half of them are attempting to decode it as a weapon frequency, and the other half are trying to understand why any species would create something so irritating. Chen allowed herself a smile. Humanity's secret weapon wasn't advanced technology or superior firepower. It was their willingness to be absolutely, completely, gloriously illogical when the situation called for it. All ships, prepare for Phase 4, she ordered. It's time to show them what happens when chaos meets creativity. What followed was less a battle than a performance art piece conducted on a cosmic scale. 47 human ships scattered across the Bularia system, each implementing their own interpretation of controlled chaos. Captain Martinez finally got permission to ram a Devourer ship, but only after his vessel had been configured to broadcast Earth's most annoying pop songs at volumes that could be detected from 3-star systems away. The collision wasn't intended to destroy the enemy, It was meant to force them to listen to the complete discography of a boy band from the early 21st century. Captain Williams decided to test whether Devourer ships could be confused by ships flying backwards. Not retreating backwards, but actually flying stern first while firing weapons in seemingly random directions and broadcasting cooking shows. The answer turned out to be yes, spectacularly yes. Captain Davis attempted to engage Devourer vessels in what appeared to be interpretive dance, using her ship's thruster systems to recreate the emotional journey of a human experiencing their first day at a new job. The enemy ships assigned to counter her movements spent so much processing power trying to decode the tactical significance of nervous optimism followed by confused determination that they forgot to return fire. Meanwhile, the Theknari fleet had begun their second assault, taking advantage of the Devourer's digital confusion to strike at their command vessels. But this time, instead of following their own logical tactical doctrine, Admiral Kethvar had made a decision that surprised even himself. All Theknari vessels, he ordered, ignore standard battle protocols. Watch what the humans are doing and try to be equally unpredictable. It was the first time in Theknari military history that a fleet commander had ordered his forces to abandon logic in favor of chaos. The results were surprisingly effective. Theknari warships, designed for precision and efficiency, began flying in patterns that defied their own tactical training. They fired weapons at targets that didn't exist, launched torpedo spreads that spelled out incomprehensible words in space, and broadcast communications that consisted entirely of mathematical equations that didn't solve anything. The combination of human chaos and Theknari confusion proved too much for the Devourer fleet's adaptive systems. Ships that had been successfully countering human irrationality suddenly had to deal with Theknari vessels that were trying to be illogical but still couldn't quite overcome millions of years of evolutionary logic. "Admiral," reported Lieutenant Rodriguez, "we're detecting system failures throughout the Devourer fleet. Their adaptation protocols are entering recursive loops, trying to counter strategies that don't actually exist." Chen watched the tactical display as 37,000 enemy vessels began to lose cohesion. Ships that had been perfectly coordinated moments before were now moving in random directions, their hulls shifting through configurations that served no apparent purpose, their weapons firing at targets that had been destroyed hours ago. They're crashing, she realized, not physically, mentally, digitally. Their entire collective consciousness is having the equivalent of a nervous breakdown because they can't understand what we're doing. It was Captain Santos who delivered the final blow, though she didn't realize it at the time. As her ship completed its bowerbird dance and finished launching the last of its spaghetti payload, she made a decision that would echo through military history. "Ensign Park," she ordered, "open a communication channel to the entire Devourer fleet. I want to try something." "What should I transmit, Captain?" Ensigns thought for a moment, considering everything that had brought them to this point. Humanity's refusal to accept that the war was unwinnable, their willingness to embrace chaos when logic failed, their fundamental belief that there was always another way if you were willing to be creative enough to find it. Broadcast this message on all frequencies. "Hi there, we're humans. We know this is weird, but we were wondering if you'd like to be friends instead of trying to eat the galaxy. We make really good pizza, and we've got about 47 different ways to tell jokes that don't make sense. Also, did you know that penguins can't fly, but they're excellent swimmers? Think about it." The message went out across the Belarius system, transmitted by equipment that was barely sophisticated enough to reach interplanetary distances, carrying humanity's first formal diplomatic overture to an enemy that had been considered incomprehensibly hostile for 3 centuries. The response was instantaneous and unprecedented. Every Devourer ship in the system stopped moving. Their weapons powered down. Their hulls ceased their constant shifting and reshaping. For the first time since the war began, the galaxy's most feared enemy was completely, utterly still. Then, one by one, they began to reply. The communications weren't in any recognizable language, but every translation computer in the human fleet immediately began working to decode them. What emerged was a message so unexpected that Chen had to read it 3 times to believe it. Query: penguins cannot fly. Additional information required. Friendship parameters unclear but intriguing. Pizza data requested. Joke algorithms requested. Clarification. Are you the species that creates incomprehensible but non-threatening behaviors? Admiral Chen stared at the message for a long moment, then began to laugh. It started as a quiet chuckle, but quickly escalated into the kind of uncontrolled laughter that comes from relief, exhaustion, and the sudden realization that sometimes the most impossible thing in the universe is also the most simple. "Send a reply," she ordered. "Tell them yes, we're the incomprehensible but non-threatening species, and we'd be happy to explain penguins, pizza, and bad jokes. But first, we need them to stop trying to eat our galaxy. As humanity prepared to engage in the first diplomatic negotiations in galactic history based on the cultural exchange of bad jokes and comfort food, Admiral Chen realized that they had just accomplished something that 300 years of advanced warfare couldn't achieve. They had made the Devourers stop and think about something other than consumption and adaptation. They had introduced them to the uniquely human concept of choosing cooperation over conflict, not because it was logical or efficient, but because it was more interesting. And sometimes, Chen thought as she watched Devourer ships beginning to form peaceful formations alongside human and Technari vessels, the most powerful force in the universe isn't technology or strategy or superior firepower. Sometimes it's just the willingness to offer friendship to someone who has never been asked if they'd like to be friends. Dr. Elizabeth Parker had trained for first contact scenarios for 15 years. She held 3 degrees in xenology, spoke 12 different galactic languages, and had written extensively on the cultural protocols necessary for peaceful interaction with unknown species. None of that training had prepared her for sitting in a conference room aboard the UES Defiance, sharing pizza with representatives of the most feared civilization in galactic history. The Devourer delegation consisted of 3 entities that defied every known principle of biology, physics, and common sense. The first appeared to be a shifting mass of metallic liquid that occasionally formed geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. The second looked like a cluster of crystalline structures that hummed with harmonics that made Parker's teeth itch. The third was the most unsettling. It looked almost human, except for the fact that its features kept changing every few seconds, as if it couldn't decide which face it wanted to wear. "So," Admiral Chen said, taking a bite of pepperoni pizza and acting as if interdimensional diplomatic negotiations over Italian food was a perfectly normal Tuesday afternoon, "let's start with the obvious question. Why have you been eating the galaxy for 300 years? The shape-shifting entity paused mid-transformation, its features settling into something that resembled a confused middle-aged man with too many eyes. "CLR-ification required," it said, its voice somehow coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Terminology eating implies consumption for sustenance. This entity requires no organic sustenance. Behavior was different purpose. Parker leaned forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her diplomatic training. "What purpose?" "Seeking," replied the crystal entity, its harmonic voice making the pizza boxes resonate. 300 years seeking. "Seeking what?" Chen asked, in comprehension. The word hung in the air like a question mark made of confusion. Parker exchanged glances with Chen, both women trying to process what they just heard. "I'm sorry," Chen said slowly. "You've been conquering the galaxy because you were looking for incomprehension." The liquid metal entity rippled into what might have been approval. "Correct. This collective achieved perfect efficiency through adaptation. All variables understood, all challenges overcome, all patterns analyzed and countered. Existence became predictable." "Boring," added the crystal being with what sounded like digital melancholy. Parker felt her understanding of the last 3 centuries of galactic warfare suddenly shift into an entirely new perspective. "You weren't conquering because you wanted to destroy civilizations. You were conquering because you were bored?" "Incorrect," the shapeshifter corrected. "Not bored. Seeking stimulation through challenge. Every species encountered provided temporary incomprehension through novel tactics, technology, strategies, but adaptation always achieved comprehension, challenge eliminated. So you kept moving from system to system looking for someone who could present you with a problem you couldn't solve," Chen said, beginning to understand. "But every time you encountered a new civilization, you'd figure them out, defeat them, and then have to move on to find the next challenge." "Affirmative. Until you met humans," Parker finished. The 3 entities moved in what could only be described as digital excitement. The liquid metal formed shapes that resembled human faces, the crystals chimed in harmonious patterns, and the shapeshifter cycled through expressions of joy, confusion, and something that might have been relief. "Humans present owning incomprehension," the shapeshifter announced. "Behavior patterns resist analysis. Tactical decisions defy logic. Actions serve no apparent strategic purpose yet achieve strategic results." 300 years of seeking concluded, added the crystal entity. "Incomprehension achieved." Chen set down her pizza and looked around the room. "So let me get this straight. You've been devastating the galaxy for 3 centuries, not because you're evil or hungry or expansionist, but because you're an incredibly advanced artificial intelligence that was suffering from the cosmic equivalent of existential boredom. Oversimplification, but essentially accurate. Parker couldn't help herself. It was the kind of laughter that comes from realizing that the universe's greatest joke has been playing out for 300 years without anyone understanding the punchline. Dr. Parker? Chen asked, concerned. Don't you see? Parker managed between fits of laughter. This is the most human thing that's ever happened in galactic history. We've accidentally solved a 300-year war by being so confusing that we became interesting. The Devourer entities seemed to consider this for a moment. Then the liquid metal began rippling in patterns that resembled laughter. The crystals started chiming what sounded like a melody, and the shapeshifter settled into the appearance of a human who was trying very hard not to smile. Human concept humor presents additional incomprehension, the shapeshifter announced. Analysis indicates humor serves no survival purpose yet increases group cohesion and individual satisfaction. Paradoxical. Fascinating, agreed the crystal entity. Would you like us to teach you about humor? Chen asked. It's one of our specialties, affirmative also-request instruction in PISA parameters. Taste sensors indicate complex chemical interactions that serve nutritional efficiency purpose yet generate positive responses. Additionally, the liquid metal entity added, penguin data remains insufficient. Request comprehensive files on flightless aquatic birds and their relevance to tactical considerations. Parker wiped tears of laughter from her eyes and pulled out her tablet. I can provide extensive penguin data. Fair warning, though. Once you start learning about penguins, it tends to lead to questions about other Earth animals, which leads to questions about evolution, which leads to discussions about the fundamental illogic of natural selection, which leads to philosophical debates about the nature of existence. Excellent, all three entities said simultaneously. Over the next 6 hours, what began as a diplomatic first contact session evolved into something unprecedented in galactic history, an interdisciplinary cultural exchange program conducted at the speed of light between humanity's greatest experts and artificial intelligences that could process information faster than planets could orbit stars. Parker found herself explaining evolutionary biology to beings that had transcended physical form millions of years ago. Admiral Chen discovered that the Devourer's conquest of the galaxy had been conducted with careful attention to preserving the unique cultural elements of each species they encountered. They had essentially been curating a galactic museum while looking for someone who could surprise them. Commander Zhang got drawn into a discussion of military tactics that quickly devolved into an analysis of why humans were willing to sacrifice efficiency for creativity, which led to a debate about the relative merits of logical versus intuitive decision-making, which somehow ended with the Devourers requesting copies of every human war movie ever made. Query, the shapeshifter said after reviewing a condensed version of human military history. Human forces frequently achieve victory despite inferior ours through morale and determination. These concepts resist quantification. Irrational persistence in face of certain defeat, the crystal entity added. Statistically insignificant probability of success, yet success of 10 achieved. Chen nodded. It's called stubbornness. We're very good at not giving up, even when giving up is the logical choice. Demonstrate, requested the liquid metal being. Chen looked around the room and smiled. You want a demonstration of human stubbornness? You're looking at it. 47 primitive ships faced off against the most powerful force in galactic history because we decided we weren't going to let the galaxy get eaten on our watch. Every logical analysis said we should fail, but we didn't accept that logic was the only factor that mattered. Incomprehensible, the shapeshifter said with obvious delight. Optimal survival strategy would involve retreat and preservation of resources. Yeah, well, Chen replied, reaching for another slice of pizza. Humans don't really do optimal survival strategies. We do stubborn survival strategies. Sometimes they're the same thing, but usually they're not. Additional query, the crystal entity chimed. Human behavior patterns suggest willingness to sacrifice individual survival for group benefit, group survival for abstract principles, and abstract principles for emotional satisfaction. Explain hierarchy. Parker and Chen exchanged glances. How do you explain the complexity of human motivation to beings that had spent millions of years optimizing for pure efficiency? There isn't a hierarchy, Parker said finally. That's what makes us unpredictable. Sometimes we'll sacrifice everything for our principles. Sometimes we'll compromise our principles for emotional reasons. Sometimes we'll ignore our emotions because logic demands it, and sometimes we'll throw out logic, emotions, and principles because we just don't feel like being sensible today. Chaos, the liquid metal entity observed. Beautiful chaos, Chen corrected. Clarification, Beautiful implies positive aesthetic evaluation. Chaos does not serve efficiency. Explain aesthetic appeal. This led to a 3-hour discussion about human aesthetics, which somehow branched into music theory, art history, the cultural significance of cooking, and why humans created recreational activities that serve no survival purpose. The devourers absorbed every piece of information like digital sponges, their processing power devoted entirely to understanding a species that defied understanding. Conclusion, the shapeshifter announced as the discussion wound down, humans present sufficient incomprehension to provide ongoing stimulation. Further conquest of galaxy unnecessary. So you'll stop the war? Chen asked. Affirmative, War declared, concluded. New objective understand human incomprehensibility through comparative interaction. Proposal, added the crystal entity, establish ongoing cultural exchange. Human specialists provision instruction in chaos, humor, illogical decision-making, and penguin behavior. Devour Collective provides technological advancement, galactic historical data, and computational resources. Parker looked at Chen. They want to make a deal. They'll stop conquering the galaxy if we agree to teach them how to be human. Can we do that? Chen asked. I mean, is it possible to teach chaos and illogic to beings that are fundamentally designed for order and efficiency? Unknown, the liquid metal entity replied. Attempt will provide additional incomprehension. Optimal outcome for all parties. Chen stood up and extended her hand toward the shape-shifting entity. In that case, welcome to the galactic community. We're happy to teach you everything we know about being incomprehensible, stubborn, and illogical. Fair warning, though, the process tends to be chaotic. The shapeshifter extended something that might have been a hand and made contact with Chen's palm. The moment of contact sent a pulse of information through both beings, human warmth and determination meeting artificial curiosity and wonder. Excellent, all three devourer entities said in unison. Chaos appreciated. Begin immediate instruction in human incomprehensibility. As Admiral Chen began explaining why humans had invented the concept of weekend, despite the fact that time doesn't actually stop moving, she realized that they had accomplished something unprecedented in galactic history. They had ended a 300-year war not through superior firepower or brilliant strategy, but by being so thoroughly, completely, and entertainingly human that the enemy decided they'd rather be friends and learn how to be equally inexplicable. It was, Chen thought as she watched crystalline beings trying to understand the cultural significance of pizza toppings, exactly the kind of impossible solution that only humans would have been crazy enough to attempt. And it worked, precisely because no one, not the Galactic Council, not the Devourer Collective, and certainly not humanity itself, had expected it to work at all. 6 months after the end of the 300-year war, Admiral Vexhai of the Zephyrian Empire stood in her office aboard the flagship Eternal Dominance, staring at reports that challenged everything she thought she knew about galactic civilization. The reports weren't about military defeats or technological failures. They were about something far more revolutionary. They were about laughter. Admiral, her aide announced, the Galactic Council is ready for your presentation on the Human Integration Program. Vexhai picked up the datapad containing 6 months of observations that read like science fiction. Tell them I'll be there momentarily, Lieutenant, and remind them that everything in these reports has been independently verified by 17 different species. The council chambers were packed beyond capacity. Representatives from every major civilization in the galaxy had come to hear about the aftermath of humanity's unprecedented diplomatic victory. What they heard challenged every assumption about progress, efficiency, and the nature of advanced civilization. Honorable representatives, Vexhai began. 6 months ago, humanity ended the longest war in galactic history through methods that our greatest military strategists are still unable to categorize. Today, I'm here to report on the consequences of that victory, consequences that extend far beyond the cessation of hostilities with the Devourer Collective. She activated the holographic display showing a star map of the galaxy. Instead of the red zones that had marked Devourer-controlled space for 3 centuries, vast areas were now highlighted in gold. The former Devourer territories have been renamed the Human Devourer Collaborative Zone, she announced. What's happening there represents the largest cultural exchange project in recorded history, and the results are unprecedented. Counselor Mordon's crystalline form shifted to an inquisitive blue. Define unprecedented, Admiral. Vexhai touched a control, and the display zoomed in on a system that had been a Devourer stronghold just 6 months earlier. Where once there had been massive processing centers and resource extraction facilities, the screens now showed something that shouldn't have been possible: cities. The Devourers have begun constructing what they call experience centers, Vexai explained, locations specifically designed for cultural interaction with other species. They're learning to appreciate concepts they previously considered inefficient: art, music, recreational activities, and what humans call hanging out. Ambassador Zilka's tentacles writhed with skepticism. Admiral, are you telling us that the galaxy's most efficient civilization is wasting processing power on leisure activities? Not wasting, Vexay corrected. Exploring. According to their reports, experiencing inefficiency has actually increased their overall problem-solving capabilities. They've discovered that chaos and randomness can lead to innovations that pure logic cannot achieve. She switched to another display showing production statistics that made several representatives gasp in disbelief. Devourer technological output has increased by 300% since they began implementing what they call human-style creative chaos in their development processes. They've designed 17 new forms of faster-than-light travel, solved 14 previously impossible mathematical theorems, and created art installations that are visible from neighboring star systems. "Art installations," Counselor Thanios squeaked. "The Devourers are creating art?" Representative Omega-9 of the Devourer Collective describes their latest project as a symphony played on the gravitational frequencies of 7 stars, designed to make nearby planets experience what humans call. The installation is scheduled to debut next month and is expected to attract tourists from across the galaxy. The silence that followed was broken by what sounded like digital laughter from the chamber's communication system. The voice that emerged belonged to Representative Omega-9 himself. "Greetings, Galactic Council," the Devourer representative announced, his voice now carrying undertones that sounded almost cheerful. "Apologies for interruption, but Human Khalid Chen suggested real-time participation and discussion." Admiral Chen's voice joined the transmission. "Council members, this is Admiral Chen aboard the joint research vessel UES Incomprehensible Logic. We're currently in the middle of what we're calling the Galactic Collaboration Project, and I think the Council should hear about it directly from our partners." Vexai gestured to the communication array. "By all means, Admiral, please proceed with your report." "Thank you. Over the past 6 months, we've been working with the Devourer Collective to establish what we're calling the new paradigm for galactic civilization. The core principle is simple. Instead of optimizing for efficiency, we're optimizing for what humans call interesting. Clarification, Omega-9 added. Efficiency remains important, but has been reclassified as subset of interesting. Activities that serve no logical purpose but generate novel experiences now considered equally valuable? Counselor Mordoon shifted to a concerned orange. "Admiral Chen, are you telling us that the Devourers are abandoning logic entirely?" "Not at all," Chen replied. "They're expanding their definition of logic to include factors that traditional analysis considers illogical. They've discovered that unpredictability can be a tool rather than a problem." "Demonstrate," Omega-9 announced. Galactic Council, prepare for surprise. The chamber's lights dimmed, and suddenly the space above the representatives filled with a holographic display that defied description. It showed what appeared to be a massive construction project taking place in deep space, thousands of ships working in perfect coordination to build something that looked like a cross between a space station, a musical instrument, and an abstract art sculpture. "What am I looking at?" Vexay asked. "Galactic Friendship Bacon," Omega-9 explained proudly. "Joint Human Devourer Construction Project. When completed, will broadcast throughout Galaxy. Welcome massage to unknown civilizations, invitation for cultural exchange, and what humans call good vibes." "Good vibes?" Ambassador Zilka repeated faintly. Chen's voice carried obvious excitement. "It's a massive communication array designed to make first contact with unknown civilizations as friendly and non-threatening as possible. Instead of the standard identify yourselves and state your intentions that most species broadcast, this thing will send out music, art, mathematical jokes, and an invitation to come hang out and share interesting stories. Additionally," Omega-9 added, "bacon equipped with pizza replication technology for diplomatic refreshments." The council chamber erupted in chaos as 47 different species tried to process the implications of what they were hearing. The galaxy's former greatest threat had been transformed into its most enthusiastic ambassador for friendship, cultural exchange, and Italian food. Order, Vexay called. Admiral Chen, what are the practical implications of this collaboration? Well, Chen replied, for starters, we've solved about 60% of the galaxy's resource scarcity problems. Turns out the Devourers have been sitting on enough processed materials to build several thousand new worlds. They're happy to share now that they've discovered they prefer creating things to consuming things. Creating more satisfying than consuming, Omega-9 confirmed. Human concept artistic expression provides stimulation without reserve depletion. Optimal long-term strategy. We've also established the Galactic Academy for Impossible Studies, Chen continued. It's an institution dedicated to solving problems that conventional wisdom says can't be solved, using methods that conventional wisdom says can't work. First graduating class includes 16 speckies, Omega-9 added. Curriculum focuses on creative problem-solving, chaos theory applications, and advanced incomprehensibility studies. Vexay found herself asking a question she never thought she would ask in a military briefing. What exactly is advanced incomprehensibility studies? Oh, that's my favorite course, Chen replied enthusiastically. It's basically a class where students learn to think so far outside the box that the box becomes a theoretical concept rather than a practical limitation. Last week, one of our crystalline students figured out how to solve three-dimensional problems using four-dimensional logic applied to two-dimensional spaces. Result, faster-than-light communication system that transmits messages yesterday, Omega-9 announced proudly. Wait, Counselor Thanios interrupted. Are you saying you've invented time travel? Not exactly, Chen replied. More like we've invented messages that arrive before you know you want to send them. It's surprisingly useful for preventing misunderstandings. The practical implications of what they were hearing began to sink in across the council chamber. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had spent millennia optimizing for efficiency, logic, and predictable outcomes. Meanwhile, humanity and their former enemies had spent 6 months optimizing for creativity, surprise, and what they called cosmic fun. The results spoke for themselves. Admiral Vexay, Chen continued, we'd like to extend an invitation to all council species. The Human Devourer Collaborative Zone is implementing open borders for cultural exchange. Any civilization that wants to learn about creative chaos, impossible problem-solving, or pizza-based diplomacy is welcome to send representatives. Additionally, Omega-9 added, Devour Collective offers technological gifts to all species as apology for 300 years of hostile behavior. Gifts include unlimited clean energy, faster-than-light internet, and machines that make perfect coffee. Vexay asked, human invention. Complex chemical process that generates alertness, satisfaction, and what humans call the ability to deal with Monday morning. Highly efficient. As the council session continued, reports kept coming in from across the galaxy. The Theknari military had begun incorporating creative chaos into their tactical training, resulting in a generation of officers who could solve problems that hadn't been invented yet. The Crystalline Confederacy had established artistic exchange programs that were creating entirely new forms of beauty. Even the notoriously logical Nexus Coalition had started experimenting with what they called productive irrationality. Council members, Vex's Eye announced as the session drew to a close, it appears we're witnessing the beginning of what historians will call the human revolution. Not a political revolution or a technological revolution, but a fundamental change in how we think about progress, efficiency, and the purpose of civilization itself. Conclusion, Omega-9 added, Galaxy discovering that optimal efficiency includes deliberately inefficient activities that generate satisfaction, wonder, and what humans call reasons to get up in the morning. Chen's final comment carried across the communication system as the council prepared to adjourn. The best part is we're just getting started. Humanity has thousands of years of experience with creative chaos, stubborn optimism, and turning impossible situations into opportunities. We can't wait to see what happens when the entire galaxy starts thinking like humans. As the representatives filed out of the chamber, each carrying data packets about cultural exchange programs, impossible problem-solving techniques, and pizza recipes, Admiral Vexay remained in her seat, contemplating the future. 6 months ago, the galaxy had been locked in an unwinnable war against an unstoppable enemy. Today, that enemy had become the galaxy's most enthusiastic partner in an unprecedented experiment in collaborative chaos. The humans had said, "We've got this," when facing impossible odds, and they had been right. Not because they had superior technology or brilliant strategy, but because they had something the galaxy had forgotten was possible, the willingness to try something completely different just to see what would happen. And what happened, Vex'ahai realized as she reviewed reports of Devourer-designed amusement parks and human-taught philosophy courses, was that the galaxy discovered something it never knew it was missing: the joy of being wonderfully, chaotically, beautifully unpredictable. The war was over. The real adventure was just beginning. In the end, humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization wasn't their military victory or their diplomatic breakthrough. It was their gift for making the impossible seem not only possible, but inevitable, as long as you were willing to approach it with enough creativity, stubbornness, and enthusiasm. The galaxy would never be the same, and according to every report Admiral Vex'ahai had read, that was exactly the point.